You were in the middle of laughing, actually laughing, not the polite kind, and then something happened. A quiet voice in the back of your head said, "Interesting, you're using humor to deflect right now." And just like that, the laugh was over. Not because anything went wrong, but because part of you couldn't just live in the moment without also being the person standing slightly outside the moment, studying it. You ended up 3 floors underground in your own head. Over a joke. Welcome to this video. Some of you are going to hear something in the next few minutes and feel that uncomfortable tightening of recognition, the kind that says yes, that's exactly it before you've even finished processing the sentence. Others will watch the whole thing convinced it doesn't apply to them, then spend the rest of the evening mentally cataloging every single interaction they had that day with unusual precision. Either way, here we are, so let's talk about what psychological overawareness actually is. Not the romanticized version people pin on mood boards next to words like empath and old soul. The real version, which is considerably less poetic and substantially more draining. There is a psychological process called metacognition. At its core, it simply means the ability to think about your own thinking, to observe your own mental processes as they happen. Most people access this occasionally, usually during moments of reflection. But there's a particular kind of person for whom this process never fully goes offline. It runs in the background constantly, without permission, at the most inconvenient times imaginable, like mid-conversation, when you're trying very hard to just seem like a regular person, you're talking to someone. The conversation is normal. And then, without choosing to, a part of your mind quietly separates from the scene and begins narrating it. You paused too long there. Now you're talking slightly faster to compensate. Are they noticing the faster talking? You're watching their eyes to check and now you look distracted, which is worse. The conversation keeps moving. You're technically still in it. But you're also somehow watching it from the ceiling. This isn't always clinical anxiety. It's something more like having a second browser tab open in your brain at all times, one you didn't open, can't close, and that is quietly using up processing power in the background around the clock. Here's a scene that might land for some of you. Someone you genuinely care about is telling you about their day. Nothing heavy, just the normal texture of their life. You're present. You're engaged. You're glad they're sharing it. And at the same time, without trying, you've noticed that they've skipped over the same part of the story twice. Not lied, just moved past it, both times, with this barely perceptible shift in energy. And now you can't unknow that. You're in the conversation and watching the conversation, and already somewhere in the background you're weighing whether to gently open a door or whether protecting them right now means leaving it closed. While they're still just talking about their Tuesday, that's what it looks like from the inside. Here's something that doesn't get acknowledged nearly enough. This trait makes you genuinely good at understanding people. And it also makes close connection harder in ways that are difficult to explain. The care is real. The depth is real. But every interaction carries this background frequency of analysis that doesn't have an off switch. You notice when someone's expression and their words aren't fully synchronized. You notice the specific weight behind "I'm fine" when it means 6 different things simultaneously. You notice small hesitations, micro shifts in tone, the things people don't say and where they don't say them. This noticing is not imagination. It's not projection, at least not always. Research on social cognition indicates that individuals with a more developed capacity for mental state attribution, the ability to intuitively model what others are thinking and feeling, do tend to be more sensitive to emotional and interpersonal signals than average. That's not a personality quirk. It's a measurable cognitive difference. The cost of it, though, that part rarely gets discussed honestly. The cost is that you can see the architecture behind everything. You'll be watching a film you're genuinely enjoying and catch yourself noticing the editing rhythm, questioning whether your emotional response is real or whether it's the score doing the work at exactly the right moment. You'll be happy, actually, cleanly happy, and something in you will immediately begin trying to understand and categorize the happiness, as if you need to fully dissect it before you're permitted to simply have it, and then it's a little smaller than it was a second ago. For many people who carry this trait, paying close attention was never just a preference. It was a skill that developed early, in environments where reading the room wasn't a social grace, it was a form of protection. Maybe moods in your home were unpredictable. Maybe you learned young that noticing subtle shifts in someone's behavior before they spoke gave you a small window to navigate accordingly. Maybe attention itself became your primary tool for feeling safe. You got extraordinarily good at it. The difficulty is that skills learned for a specific environment don't automatically retire when that environment changes. Researchers who study hypervigilance describe it as an adaptive survival response, one that, once tuned to a particular kind of threat, tends to keep running long after the original conditions have shifted. The nervous system learned a pattern. The pattern became efficient. And efficient patterns don't just dissolve because the circumstances no longer require them. It's a very sensitive alarm system. It served a genuine purpose once. But now it activates when nothing is burning. There's a specific kind of loneliness that tends to accompany this, and it's worth naming carefully because it's often misunderstood, even by the people experiencing it. It's not loneliness from isolation. People with this trait often have deep, meaningful relationships. It's something subtler, a quiet, recurring sense that you are processing experience at a register that doesn't quite overlap with most of the people around you. That you see layers others aren't looking at. And what you want, more than most things, is to be understood at the same depth you understand others, which doesn't happen often, and you know it doesn't. Which removes the small comfort of not knowing. You can't have that blissful gap in awareness. You can see exactly what's missing and why it's rare and why that won't suddenly change. Someone once described this to me as being a translator for a language no one else is choosing to learn. That image has stayed with me. It's remarkably precise. It's also a little devastating in the way that very accurate things sometimes are. Now, and this part is important, being highly aware does not mean being correct. This is where the trait quietly turns on itself. You can be exceptionally sensitive to human behavior and still be completely wrong about a specific person in a specific moment. Awareness and accuracy are not the same thing. The skill of noticing is real. But when it starts to trust its own conclusions too automatically, it stops being perception and starts being a more sophisticated version of assumption. You read a tone. You construct a full narrative around it. You operate on that narrative for days, or weeks. And then you find out you misread it entirely, because you were perceiving patterns, not the person. The individuals who seem to use this trait most effectively have learned to treat their own perceptions the way a good scientist treats a hypothesis, something worth testing, not something already proven. They hold their readings loosely. They stay curious longer than is comfortable. There's something else worth naming, a particular relationship with pretense that people who are too aware tend to develop. Polite performance starts to feel like a lot of maintenance. Not always because of some rigid principle, but simply because you can see the gap between what's being performed and what's actually happening, and sustaining the fiction alongside the reality takes a kind of dual processing effort that adds up. You'll be in a conversation that's technically cordial and somewhere internally be noting that both of you know there's a different conversation underneath this one. It creates this low-grade impatience with the surface of things. Not hostility, more like quiet exhaustion at the distance between what's real and what's being presented as real. That's hard to explain to someone who doesn't feel it. And most people don't, but here is something worth slowing down for. Awareness and wisdom are not the same thing. They live near each other. They are not the same. You can notice everything and still understand very little. Genuine insight requires more than observation. It requires sitting with what you've observed long enough for it to reveal something beyond the first interpretation. It requires a real willingness to be surprised, especially by yourself, because here is the uncomfortable part: some of what you perceive in other people is genuinely them. And some of it is you. Some of the patterns you recognize so readily in others are patterns you know because you carry them too. Some of the hypervigilance that makes you perceptive also, in specific moments, makes you see threat in the wrong places. The people who have learned to use this trait constructively are, almost without exception, the ones who turn that same quality of attention inward, with honesty, not judgment. That work is harder than reading other people. It requires tolerating the discomfort of finding yourself in the data. If you've made it this far, I want to say something plainly: the way you move through the world, this specific mode of experiencing things up close, in high resolution, with all of its precision and its weight and its occasional ache, is not a defect. It is not something that requires correction or suppression, unless it is genuinely causing harm to your life or your relationships. It is a particular way of being human. It carries real costs. It also carries real gifts. And most people who have lived inside it for years have never once had someone look at them and say, I see what this actually is, and it makes complete sense, so there it is, you are not too much. You are not broken. You are not malfunctioning, you are, to a degree that is sometimes exhausting and occasionally extraordinary, paying attention.